Thanks, Siddharth, for that lovely introduction for everyone. So, so we're going to talk the next half an hour about the most interesting topic, the monetization and how payments are going to add value to it. So, as Siddharth has introduced our lovely panelists on stage, let's just directly get on to the topic per se. So, while I was coming on the flight today, I saw a very interesting article which said how UPI is making inroads. So to set the context right, we are seeing that there are about 1 billion cards in the market, say 5% of it being credit cards, rest being debit cards per se. Sorry, 1 million cards, so rest being this thing. So with this, what we see is rest of it is completely cash economy. So how this cash economy is being broken in and brought into digital payments is what we're going to talk about. And as we see, UPI is making a huge inroad. What we read is it's almost getting to 1 billion payments in August. Maybe next month we're going to break that. So with that, what we notice is if you dig deeper, there's about certain states which are having 15 transactions per the last 5 months average. Some of them as low as Chhattisgarh being as low as 0.08. So what maybe I'll want to throw to the participants, and maybe Amit you can start off with, is to say, where do we see this kind of a huge difference in terms of adaptations from one geography into another geography?
So I think you touched upon the point that we have 1 billion cards now, and out of that only 50 million or so are credit cards, rest of them are debit cards. So I think from streaming perspective and OTT perspective, one of the very important products that is there is the subscription model that most of the players are operating with. And there is some very good progress from the regulator's perspective where, you know, up till now only credit cards could be used for buying subscriptions. Now they have also allowed for debit cards to be used for subscription. So that I see as a very big development. And as you spoke about UPI's adoption, so we all know the numbers are crazy. Every month the growth is that we're seeing is phenomenal, and we will cross hopefully 1 billion transactions in next 1 month. But most of those transactions are happening in P2P world, so the merchant payments actually happening through that is low, and also online merchant payments is specifically low. It's mostly, you know, offline QR code kinds of payment that are happening there. So I think some good traction that we are seeing on payment methods, and hopefully the gap that we had in terms of coverage. When we say coverage, we mean that whether every customer has an instrument to buy a digital service or not, we are seeing that gap being bridged very fast. So like every other industry, OTT industry should see an upside from that.
Okay. Thanks for that insight. Moving on to that, one of the very reasons why customers are not really adopting the payments methods which are there, we see is security-related concerns. What we see is in the last 2 to 3 years, India has been in the top 5 in terms of the number of reported security incidents per se. So what's the industry doing on this side to maybe bring down this fear? Maybe you can take that, Shailesh.
Certainly, thanks, Prashant. So you're right. One of the big barriers to customers using digital payments tends to be the notion of security. What happens if my credentials get compromised? Interestingly, India is actually one of the better markets when it comes to security of payments. There are fraud attempts everywhere on a daily basis, but India actually doesn't have such a high fraud loss rate. And that's in part because a number of the security mechanisms that are in place. So when it comes to card not present transactions, the requirement for an OTP actually solves a bit for it. But what we've actually found is over a period of time, although that enabled the industry where customers got the confidence to start using their cards, that also creates friction. So what companies like Visa are trying to solve is how do you reduce the friction without compromising on security? So there's a lot that's happened now in terms of authentication methods, but the way forward in this are technologies like tokenization, which the RBI permitted not very long ago. What that allows a payments player to do is to take a payments credential, and then you create something which is specific to a use case. We were talking about the phone-based payments earlier, like an Apple Pay or a Samsung Pay. What happens in that instant is actually you've taken a real payment credential. I might take Amit's card number, but then I put a new credential on that device, such that if, in fact, Narayan were to be able to somehow hack into my phone or his phone, that piece of information is useless for you. And then the network acts behind it to actually make sure that those don't get compromised. So tokenization is a big way forward. EMV cards had already been in the marketplace, and there's a number of other innovations that are happening on authentication that will hopefully give customers more confidence.
That's very interesting. It's like saying that if someone steals a card from your wallet, it will not work because it's sitting in his wallet. That's the kind of security that he's talking of. We look forward to something which is coming on that side. Moving on to the next point, as we see a simple aspect of a customer watching OTT content on his mobile, we see multiple things happening. He's actually a customer of a mobile handset per se, a Samsung or an Apple or OnePlus or one of these. He's using data from one of the telecom service provider, so they call him as his customer. He's basically consuming content created by some of you guys here, so you call him as your customer per se. He is making payments using one of your platforms maybe as we speak, and there are advertisers who are trying to get him to become his customers as he is trying to do this entire system. So the acquisition is a very, very key strategy in all of these things, and seamlessly stitching these across the bridge so that the customer doesn't have to go to each of these points and become their customer to start using this seamlessly. So maybe you can give us a little bit of thoughts on how the industry is trying to solve these problems through partnerships.
Thank you so much. So, it's an interesting point that you raise. Whether it's OTT or any industry, I think the key lies in the ecosystem and the partnerships that you build, right? So that essentially holds true for any vertical. Coming back to OTTs, I don't think it's one size fits all. It's essentially solutions that will sit with a particular partner. So even if you look at multiple OTTs, they might not be seeking the same kind of solution. So if the propensity of a customer in a particular OTT platform is to actually view it more on desktop, I'm talking hypothetically here, whereas the other one is mobile, you can't deploy the same solutions for the person. So the thing is, most payment people would consider that they are the most important part of the ecosystem, but we are a growth enabler for partners in that sense. So essentially, you'll have to look at it like we are the Cameo partners for you. When you go into an OTT platform, you don't go thinking that, I'm going to make a payment today. You're out there to view content. But the kind of experience that we provide at that particular point of time, how much of a frictionless experience is it? What are the kind of pain points that we can solve for you is the thing that we look at. So, and PayPal typically, if you look at it, globally we worked with the biggest of OTT players, if you look at it, right? So we bring a wealth of information, and we work with partners like Visa, for example. And jointly we try and build the ecosystem. So largely it's about partnerships and how you leverage on that.
So just as an example, so a lot of ecosystems are evolving, right? So most of the people are trying to, or many people are trying to play an ecosystem game where they themselves are having a streaming service, a content service, and they want to cross-sell their other products on that. So we'll see a lot of these ecosystem players evolve, and each of them is approaching from their position of strength. So for example, somebody would come from an advertising side of it, somebody may come from a retail side of it, and try to engage customer in different ways so that the lifetime value of customer could be maximized. I think one of the good implementations that we did recently, and we saw a huge uptick in that, was during the IPL. So IPL streaming on Hotstar, customers were answering questions, they were collecting points, they could pick up an Amazon coupon using Amazon Pay coupon using those points, and right there as an advertiser, Swiggy was present, so they can click the Swiggy button right there and use their Amazon Pay coupon and make the payment and convert. So we saw very good uptick through that. So there are a lot of such experiments happening, and we'll figure out what works best for customers and all the participants in the ecosystem very soon, I think.
That's nice. So one other related topic that you touched upon is customers are spoiled for choice at this point of time, whether it may be for payments, whether it may be for a OTT kind of a ecosystem per se. So in this kind of a scenario, getting a customer on board, the acquisition costs are quite high per se. So what is it that you are doing as an industry, working with each other to keep the customer stickiness on? Maybe anyone would want to give a go on this one?
So, see, it's a good point, right? Across industries, again, if you look at it, the cost of acquiring a new customer is significantly higher than retaining somebody. So when you look at it, the point is, if you choose a particular payment partner to go with you, you make a conscious choice as to what is the kind of experience your customer is going to get. The point is, let's take OTT aside for a moment, and let's look at, let's say, e-com, which is a larger part of the system, right? You would see that a lot of people are interested in buying your product. In this case, it may be your content. But if your payment partner fails you at that particular point of time, the likelihood of that person coming back to your system is lost, right? So we work with regulators, of course, and luckily for India, the regulator is at the forefront of these discussions, right? So if we are able to bring in the kind of customer that is going to add value to your system. So what we can tell you is, this customer, the kind of information that we have, and within PayPal, we like to call it this way, we like to believe that we are a risk management company in the space of digital payments, right? So we have several touch points to tell you the kind of customer who's going to be sticky with you, what is the kind of lifetime value that he can bring into your system, while he adds value for both of us. From a customer's point of view, it's about, how easily do I get to where I want to be? From a merchant's point of view, is it how can I add him sticking along with the system? So those are the areas that we look at. So, and we can tell you these are the propensity that we have a life cycle value management system that will essentially tell you that the propensity of somebody coming in from this particular vertical, he's likely to do this in the other vertical. So we're able to bring in that wealth of information to you. So that's one of the areas that merchants benefit from.
Could I just add to that? There's actually, it's a wealth of opportunity in terms of partnerships. In fact, this is something I wanted to share with the group. In terms of what can be done between the subscription-based services that OTT players have, as well as what payment players are doing like ourselves. And it's across both acquisition and usage, or retention for that matter. When it comes to acquisition, one of the most important aspects of acquisition is be able to target the right customer, get the segmentation right, because acquisition admittedly is expensive and you don't want to waste that on the wrong customer. So what we, for example, done, and if I could, Amit, use an Amazon example, is we actually do, so for example, Visa has several tiers of customers. There are amongst those customers who are at the affluent end of the spectrum. So can we tie up with a player that gives them an ebook service, or it gives them a set of propositions which are tiered towards the affluent customer, using our reach and using somebody else's content in this case, you can target that right set of customers as a set of offers. And what we find is that the conversion rate of those customers is substantially higher. The retention rates of those customers are also substantially higher. Likewise, you could have collaborations like co-branded card products. What you're effectively trying to do is to get to that, once you have that right, a large base of core customers, you can amplify the loyalty that they have with the platform based on, let's say, a payments product. So a customer takes on, let's use your example again, an Amazon customer has an Amazon Prime membership, you give him an Amazon co-branded card, that customer is going to spend a lot of money outside of Amazon. Is there a way to reward that spend and bring him back to the platform in a way that improves the lifetime value of that customer? Now that's a proposition that works in entertainment as it works in e-commerce or as it works in groceries. So there's a lot of potential actually for our industries to collaborate.
So a very interesting point that you touched upon is how companies are willing to acquire the right customers per se. A solid example for this would be what's happening in the telco ecosystem at this point of time. So in fact, I feel like telco is paying you more money than what you're paying them in terms of the bouquet of offerings that are coming through on the multiple sites, whether they're giving you a handset insurance, they're giving you data per se, they're giving you voice and this thing, they're giving you other access in terms of entertainment, everything bundled in one particular piece. So data has become the new fuel or currency. Payment is no longer happening in terms of the currency of INR or whatever. It's happening through the currency of data. So what I want to understand maybe from you, Amit, is having the rich amount of data that the customer is doing in terms of purchase, payment, watching something, listening to something, maybe previous session, audible books, etc. The ecosystem that's there, how is it being tapped to serve the customer better, get better profitability, and more on it?
Sure. So in a payments business, we have two customers. One is the merchant and one is the customer. So we have a lot of engaged customers on Amazon platform already. So when we work with a merchant today, our approach is that, what kind of customer acquisition that you are looking at, what kind of engagement levels that you're looking at. So essentially understanding what are the goals of the merchant, and then, we, on month, on quarterly basis, we define how we can, run the right set of campaigns so that the end objective can be achieved for the merchant and for, and customer gets what the customer is looking for. So that is how we try to stitch the equation.
So another interesting fact that's there is how much as a percentage spend an Indian consumer is doing on entertainment vis-a-vis something else. The staggering fact remains is Indian customer is just spending about 2 to 3% or even lower of his spend on entertainment, whereas global averages show as high as about 18% in US and China, etc. So what kind of movement and trends are you seeing in the payment patterns? Is it changing over a period of time? Maybe can you give it a...
Sure. So you're absolutely spot on, right? So the kind of percentage penetration of the entertainment segment within card-based payments is actually fairly similar to what you talked about. It's growing fast. Today, much of that entertainment spend isn't so much, well, there's some of the services that folks that are in this room are occupying that space, but a lot of that spend is going into ad hoc payments. So a lot of spend goes into the ticketing platforms. I want to buy a ticket, so I go onto one of the many ticketing platforms. That's a big sector. A lot of that spend goes into sort of quasi-entertainment, but in our world we sort of lump them in terms of subscriptions to gyms, in terms of subscription to fantasy gaming. So these are some of the segments that have been growing pretty well. That said, what you talked about it much earlier, one of the problems that we've had when it comes to services such as OTT is that not everyone who had a payment product was able to efficiently and with low friction set up their credentials for a standing instruction. So what the RBI permitted literally on the 21st of August, there's this e-mandate, what allows about 950 million debit cards to now put a subscription payment. And it's been done in a really good way. We were in fact quite involved with that proposal building as an industry and as Visa, is that it allows the customer to put their credentials, but there is an authentication. So I have to validate who I am, I have to prove that I am me with an OTP, and then once it's done, then you can just keep on getting your monthly payments through. And then if you want to make a change, of course, then there's another authentication to do. So that's a big step forward. And what that's going to do is to enable a much larger number of customers to pay in the same frictionless way that a small number of credit card users could do. So it solves the willingness to pay problem to an extent. Of course, there's an ability to pay. I'm sorry, the ability to pay and the willingness is to be solved, yeah.
Yeah, so I would second what he just said, that from Amazon Pay perspective, in past 12 to 18 months, the fastest growing segments that we are seeing are OTT and fantasy gaming and gaming segments. So we are seeing early signs of the spends going on entertainment. But of course, I mean, our per capita income is much lower than where China is, and we know that the discretionary spends, start picking up only after a certain threshold. So we are far away from that at an average levels. But the SEK that we talk about of 8,500 million customers, we are seeing good growth of OTT, entertainment, and gaming kind of segments there.
So in fact, that should sound music to the ears of the people sitting here, I assume. So on the same lines, when you talk about monetization, there are two types of monetization which is done. The paying customer, like you mentioned at one point of the time, and the other one is the paying advertiser who advertises on your platform and funds for the overall profitability per se. So when it comes to paying customer, predominantly we know that people are more or less consuming advertisement-based services per se, and not so much of a paid premium as we're moving up the curve. But then also what is very important is even in the advertisement-based revenue that is being earned, the revenues are directly proportional to what the customer does. Does he just watch an ad and forget it? Does he click further and then goes into it? Does he complete the transaction per se by making a purchase? So classic example in the Hotstar thing that you're talking about, an ad of Coca-Cola comes in and then there is a banner running below that click here to make the purchase. So that's when the OTT provider will get the maximum benefits per se. So how is the stringing in of all of these things happening? Maybe you can say what PayPal is doing in this area for string in all of it.
Without actually sticking to a specific case of what we do and stuff like that, right? Because that becomes very specific. But for the larger audience, what I can tell you is it's what's the kind of APIs that you can open up for people, right? And how do you partner with them? The point is contextual payments is of relevance when you show somebody to a person who's likely to act on it. When it comes to, without restricting myself to the idea of advertiser-based revenue, let me come back to the larger question of how can, let's say, a payment partner like PayPal help you in an ideal case scenario? The biggest fear that somebody should have is, let's say, for this space, subscription is the need of the hour. You want somebody to keep coming back to you, whether it's a 5 rupee thing to just watch one episode, or let's say a 1,000 rupee membership month on month. You want people to come back to your platform. So somebody adds a card on your file. After that, let's say his card has expired. Is his first thought to go to multiple platforms and then keep renewing the fact that there is a new card that I have to tap? In core markets where PayPal has functioned, we have capabilities which at some point of time we are hoping we'll bring to India. Yeah, and which is again regulator-led, right? But if you look at it, PayPal has a capability in advanced markets where you can add multiple cards on file. So if your first card has expired, the due date is over, it automatically taps the next card on file. So you don't lose that customer at that particular point of time. It's potential revenue that you save. So that's one of the ways in which we can add value. The other thing is, when it comes to advertisers, it has to be about, what is the strategy of the particular merchant at that particular point of time? It is about, what is the audience set that you're going after? Is it relevant for me to actually show that messaging? And our API is available for us to partner with you on. So that's where it is.
Actually, just to build on what Narayan said, so some of that tokenization technology we talked about earlier, that solves for that. Because what happens is, if I put my card on file in an app, like any of the entertainment ones, when my card expires, and when you get a new card number, that automatically gets updated. And a lot of this is actually very contextual. So for example, on a Tata Sky, when your bill comes up for payment, you have an option for it to scan you a QR code. And using any of the payment apps, it could be a bank app where you put a Visa card behind it, or it could be any of the other payment platforms, you can just scan it and pay it. Now that becomes really interesting, not just for a Tata Sky subscription, but tomorrow when you're paying per view, it doesn't just have to be the post-paid mechanism. You could flash on the screen an event and say, do you want to buy it right now? And then the customer goes ahead and makes the purchase. The job of a payments company is actually not so much to make payments happen, is to make commerce happen. And if in that moment there is an ability to make commerce happen, the last thing you should be bothered about is payments.
So what we have seen on experimentation on the content side of it is, at the most people have gone to a weekly pack or sachetization of content per se. But what we have not really seen about is cutting the content and maybe pricing it like you pay for this show and then it's charged this much. Pay for this particular match only and pay for this particular thing. So is Indian payment ecosystem ready to take on a transaction-based payment per se? And then how is it?
So yeah, I don't think there is any infrastructure issue with that. And in fact, if you look at the recent publications by RBI also, where the vision is to have more smaller ticket size, more frequent transactions, and focusing on those transactions. So a regulator loves that, and as a payment provider, we also love that. We want the customer to come 4 times and make 4 or 5 payments in a day. Why not? So, I mean, we will definitely, and OTT players know more about this because it's kind of get into the pricing strategy, not really the payment completion part of it. But as a customer, I would love to have that kind of a pricing model where I can sample something for as little as 5-10 rupees, and then if I like it, I can keep buying more. So, but infrastructure-wise, I think all the players can support it today.
So maybe what I'll do is the last 5 minutes, open up the this thing. Yeah, you'd want to ask a question? Can someone pass a mic to him and to him maybe?
Give it up for our volunteers, ladies and gentlemen. They work so hard. Thank you, lady. She's waiting for the tea session now. मैडम एक बटन होता है उसमें, वो बटन दबाओगे ना तो आओ आओ आ जाओ. Say it's working sir. Say hello. दिल से बोलो hello.
Hi, hello.
अरे और दिल से.
Hi guys. Can you hear me? Yeah.
अगर म्यूजिक डीजे कम कर दोगे तो उनकी आवाज और सुनाई देगी. Love you brother. You're a very DJ personality.
My question is for Mr. Narayan. So Narayan, I have a platform called ISISthefilm.com, and that's where we have partnered with PayPal. So I had two questions. One was, so this platform caters viewers from all across the world, and we are charging the customer $10 per view. Unfortunately, in India, because we've kept a $10 fee, we're not able to access the movie in India. I wonder why. I'm trying to crack this for a really long time, but because we've put $10, but the customers in India cannot watch it.
I think it's a technical issue. I'll have to get into the details of what it is, but maybe we can take this offline. That's not a worry.
Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
And my second question was, as PayPal has around, if I'm not wrong, 200 million customers?
286 million plus, yeah.
286 million. So again, as an OTT platform, in terms of partnership, is there a marketing opportunity for my platform with PayPal?
One of the big strengths that PayPal has, one of the big strengths among many others, is the access to customers that you have. So let me quantify that this way. When we see freelancers as a market or SMBs as a market, that's what we were technically known for in India, right? Because we enabled that entire economy. So if you look at an SMB, somebody sitting out of a Jaipur technically wouldn't have had access to these markets. And the pull comes from the advanced markets like a US, a UK, Australia, so on and so forth. So these people insist on paying via PayPal. So the brand pull there is really strong. So to your question, do you have access to these customers? Absolutely. But it depends on what your marketing strategy is. Now, depending on where there are synergies, we could obviously explore things to do and what we can do mutually. But the question is, it depends on what your marketing strategy is. If there is a potential that you see, there is 286 million customers that are waiting out there for you. That's where it is.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
All right, thank you so much, gentlemen. One more question. All right, Zubin, you deserve that question now. I'm going to come to you running.
Thanks. So I'm Zubin Dubash. I head Shimaru.me, our OTT platform. I think since this entire conference is about iSTREAM and we're talking about payments in the streaming world, the last panel talked about how technology is getting finer and more minute towards ensuring lower buffering rates and making sure that there's zero buffering and zero latency. It's a utopian question, but I just need to I need one of you to answer it, saying when do we have seamless buffering-free payments, which means I click and it happens, full stop. Because today, I mean, I'm sure everyone in this auditorium would agree with me when I say that there is at least a 10-step process or a 10-click process to do a payment. And I think we all in our own little number crunching will have a funnel, which will say how many guys clicked on the first step to the last step, and then try and figure out how do we move the guy up the needle. So anyone can take that question.
Sure. And I note that our MC introduced us as the problem section of this entire day's proceedings. So you're right. So there is a lot of payment friction in the market. And unfortunately, there is a loss of sales. It's not probably as bad as you're making it out to be, but a reasonable amount of...
Trust me, we do this every single day.
So do I.
Yeah.
A reasonable amount of payments get stopped. So let me just break that problem a little bit. A large part of the payment failures that happen, particularly in the OTT or the e-commerce world, are based on the authentication of that customer. I'm going on to Amazon, or I'm going on to Flipkart or whatever, and I'm trying to make a purchase, and I have to demonstrate that that card, that credential was in fact mine. Then there's an OTP, and there's all of that, those multiple screens that happen. So it's a recognized problem. We're all working on it. There will be, at least from our side, some announcements fairly soon that we will solve a large part of the authentication problem. There is a second part of the problem, which is a genuine problem, which is what we call the authorization. So that's much more of a real issue. If I'm using my debit card for 720 rupees and I happen to have 680 rupees on my account, legitimately that payment shouldn't go through. Although the payment, the number of times payments get blocked for that reason is substantially smaller. What we see a lot more in India is it's the first problem that is much more prevalent, and that's what we're trying to solve.
So just to add quickly, so we at Amazon have been trying to solve this problem for past 3 years, and globally we did not have this problem of second factor authentication. So we've invested a lot. We took a license from RBI and launched our own wallet and went to the whole hog. So we've solved a lot of those problems now, and you can see the goodness of it. So there is a single-click Amazon Pay payment available on a lot of platforms. So there are instruments which will give you a higher conversion and other things. You should try it on some of them. Yeah. And again, the card flows are again getting optimized as he talked about. So we should see some goodness coming from there as well.
So I just made a mention. So have you used a contactless card? So what we're trying to do is to give that same kind of experience in the online world. So that's